Okay, today we're getting into Unit 6, Soils and Agriculture, specifically the soil section. The first thing is soil versus dirt. A lot of times you'll hear dirt referred to as displaced soil, where you'll hear soil be talked about as having sand, silt, and clay, minerals, which those are the minerals, plus organic matter. Now, when we talk about dirt being displaced, all we're really saying is it only really has the sand, silt, and clay components. So dirt that's on your clothes or is taken somewhere, we just say it's just in a different location. But the focal point of soil is the idea that it supports life. Dirt does not support life. So the organic matter is what kind of brings about that idea of supporting life, whether it be organic matter or the actual organisms within the soil that helps kind of keep up that idea that soil helps support life, specifically your plants being your producers. Our first question of Unit 6, what geologic processes change the surface of the Earth? Now, the Earth's crust is made of different types of rock. We have intrusive rock, you have sedimentary rock, you have basalt rock, you have metamorphic rock, you have igneous rock. These rocks form different types of soil. And you have a different combination of your minerals, remember sand, silt, and clay, that leads us to different identifications of soil, different types. And the movement of your tectonic plates leads to new land, whether land being created with like mountains or breaking it down and forming like your trenches. So remember, going back to Unit 3, plate tectonics led to greater biodiversity because you're essentially building new land. New land will eventually lead to new climate. New climate leads to new species that eventually react to the changing landscape. So when two geologic plates collide, the pressure forms that land to go up, and that's how we get your hills, your mountains, and higher elevation landforms end up being formed. As your plates end up moving away from each other, that's when we get your ridges and your trenches, especially in your oceans. Now, weathering, we are breaking rocks down into smaller pieces. This will become eventually your soil. Now, we have three different categories of weathering. The first is chemical weathering. Whenever you are changing your minerals in the rocks, so manipulating those sand, silt, and clay, you end up forming a new substance. The definition of a chemical reaction is forming a new product, a new substance in the end. A new substance is one that has its own unique set of physical and chemical properties. So you're creating something with a new identity. Three examples: hydrolysis, water and minerals react to split the rock. Hydro means water, lysis means break down, so break down with water. Now, oxidation, oxygen causes iron in the rock to rust, so here's our new substance being formed. And carbonation, water combines with carbon dioxide to form carbonic acid. Once again, there is our new thing. The carbonic acid will react with the rock and break it down. Now, rust, I think everyone's familiar with rust, has that nice orangish, reddish color. A lot of times you'll hear it referred to as kind of rust orange with what's happening. But you're basically creating something new, which is basically also weakens the rock and allows it to be broken down into smaller pieces. Our second type is biological weathering. Remember, bio means life. So we are focusing on breaking down rock with interactions with living organisms. A lichen is a mutualistic relationship. Remember, that's where both benefits between algae and fungus. They will live on the rock, secrete an acid that breaks it down even further. The algae provides food. The fungus provides shelter. So they live together to make sure all their needs are met. Whenever we talk about succession, where the gradual formation of maybe a stable forest, primary succession is when you need to form the soil. Typically what happens is you have your lichens and your mosses will go on bare rock and start to break down that rock. They'll die, and now not only do you have small rock particles, but you also have organic matter kind of forming the basis of that initial soil layer for what's to come. Tree roots. Trees are very strong. This tree kind of grew basically through that boulder and cracked it in half. So you will see roots have the ability to kind of grow through pretty much anything. Animals burrowing will loosen rock, break rock up. Bacteria also releasing chemicals to break down rock. The whole point is what living things are making rocks into smaller pieces that can eventually become soil. Our final weathering mechanism is physical. This is also referred to as mechanical. But basically, we are using physical forces, and primarily we will be looking at pressure to cause rock to break down. The first is temperature changes. So if there is a crevice or a hole in the rock, water will collect, it'll freeze. When things freeze, they expand. It'll cause stress fractures within the rock. Well, this happens in a cycle over the period of days, weeks, or years. Eventually, it'll have enough fractures in that rock where the hole has become bigger, and it'll cause it to completely crack in half. Wind. Different rocks have different hardness. So some wind, if it's hitting rock directly, will break it apart. Water movement. The Grand Canyon was formed by the Colorado River, kind of cutting down the rock layer like knife with butter over hundreds and thousands of years. We have this giant canyon as a result, and you can watch the supplemental video how the Grand Canyon was formed to get a little bit more detail on that. Then finally, glaciers. This is what we have called glacier till in this picture. Think of glaciers as kind of giant cheese graters against the surface of the earth. And as they move, like cheese graters or giant sandpaper, they're basically making those rocks into much finer particles or finer pieces as they move. So a little quick review. Remember, chemical, we have the formation of new substances through a chemical reaction. And what we had here was oxidation, which turns that iron ore into rust, as well as carbonation, water and carbon dioxide forming carbonic acid, and that acid having a direct impact on the rock. Biological, this is interaction with living things. This is going to be your tree roots breaking apart rock, or your lichens, which do release an acid which will break down the rock, kind of getting it prepped for soil to be created. Your dead lichen and your rock pieces forms that initial layer, which brings about weeds and whatnot that will then grow. Your weeds will die, forming another organic layer, and then prepping the area for the next plant species to come. And then physical, these are going to be your forces, specifically talking about your pressure. We talked about glaciers being kind of a giant cheese grater or sandpaper to the surface, kind of breaking that rock down as those giant ice pieces are moving. Water that settles in the crevices or holes of rock, they'll expand, put stress fractures and cracks into the rock till eventually parts of it break. And then water movement. And this is how the Grand Canyon was formed. Basically, the rivers kind of cutting into the rock layers with the downward motion and pressure of that water cutting into things. Remember, water is a very good substance that breaks things down. And this all has to deal with breaking rock down. So mechanisms to break rock down into eventual soil. So putting rocks into smaller pieces, and then soil will end up being created over time. We're next going to get into just a little bit of an intro for what is soil and how does it form. So talking just a little bit about the second question. Soil primarily is formed. Minerals make up a large percentage. Your minerals are going to be your sand, silt, and clay. Those particles. We have organic matter, and organisms will make up your organic material, and then air and water. All four of these things are needed to support life. Now, when we talk about supporting life, primarily we're talking about your plants, because remember, your plants are your producers, and they are creating all of the energy for the ecosystem and the food web. The factors in terms of forming soil, your parent material, this is going to be your soil source, so like your weathered rock. Your leaf litter or compost, dead organisms. This is going to be organic material that adds. So when you mow the lawn, you may mulch your grass clippings back into the soil to add more organic material and nutrients back into the soil. Kind of think circle of life. Your animals, they do have their important niche, their job in terms of what they provide with the soil. Your earthworms help to break things down. They're a type of decomposer. Climate. Remember, climate is the most important factor when it comes to soil formation. Humidity, warmth. Primarily, we're looking at temperature and precipitation with this. That can speed up soil formation if it's really warm and wet. But in the end, it is a very slow process. It can take hundreds of years to make new soil if soil wasn't already present. And then finally, the slope of the land. Gravity can move particles down slope. So think of your rivers. If they have a sharper slope, it'll cut into that land more. Or gravity in general with slopes, if it's bringing in contact with living things or chemicals, can speed up the process of breaking down your rocks or providing nutrients to places. But gravity is an important thing to kind of speed up the process. And then finally, just texture. When it comes to texture, we come back to our 3 mineral particles. Your sand is your largest. You can probably take a handful of sand and figure out what an individual particle of sand looks like. Silt is kind of middle ground, a little bit more compacted, but not as large as sand. Clay is by far the smallest. You're going to need a pretty high magnification on the microscope to see this. If you get clay from a stream bed, it looks like kind of one mass. Because it's very compacted, when you look under the microscope, it will look like kind of bricks like laying on top of one another. So the smallest particle, clay, largest particle, sand. Okay, that is the end of our intro to geologic processes and intro to soil, with how soil is being formed, kind of what makes it up. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks for watching.